The ambient temperature inside the shattered, exposed fuselage of the Cessna 208 Caravan was negative 14 degrees Fahrenheit, but the incoming data packets rendering on my ruggedized field tablet were running entirely hot. I knelt on the severely angled deck of the ruined aircraft. I kept my center of gravity extremely low, one gloved hand hooked solidly under an exposed titanium rib of the airframe. Ready to move, the second the wind shifted again. The aggressive, howling gale was currently tearing through the dense pine canopy outside, violently rocking the detached tail section of the plane against the frozen bedrock. The bitter, highly toxic scent of frozen aviation fuel, sheared aircraft-grade aluminum, and crushed pine needles hung thickly in the confined, jagged space. I swiped past the standard GPS impact coordinates and the localized weather telemetry matrices, drilling directly down into the raw, unfiltered hexadecimal code of the engine's primary electronic control unit. I isolated the final 3 seconds of the flight data recorder's telemetry log. My eyes scanned the rapidly shifting columns of numbers with practiced, mechanical efficiency, completely ignoring the biting cold that was slowly seeping through my insulated layers. The manifold pressure reading hadn't dropped slowly due to high-altitude atmospheric icing. Icing was the standard, completely predictable environmental variable for this specific mountain range in mid-December. It was the highly convenient, easily digestible excuse the local municipal authorities were already actively feeding to the local press corps, but the raw data told a completely different, mathematically undeniable story. I ran the comparison again, sensor output versus the physical valve position recorded by the mechanical relay. My stomach dropped instantly when the numbers absolutely refused to match. The pressure had spiked violently, going entirely off the measurable charts 2.4 seconds before the total, catastrophic engine seizure. The primary pressure relief valve hadn't just failed due to material fatigue. It had been artificially pinned closed. Two highly sensitive internal systems violently disagreeing meant one of them had been deliberately forced to lie. I find mechanical failures before they turn into corporate cover-ups and unexplainable funerals. The twisted, jammed aluminum door of the aft cargo bay didn't just casually open, it was kicked violently inward by a heavy, snow-packed, steel-shanked boot. The sudden, explosive influx of atmospheric pressure sent a flurry of loose cabin insulation and frozen snow swirling wildly into the freezing air of the cabin. If we don't get off this exposed ridge in the next 10 minutes, we are going to spend the next 3 days freezing to death inside a metal tube, a woman said. Her voice cut cleanly and sharply through the deafening roar of the impending blizzard. It was completely devoid of panic, functioning purely on ruthless, practical survival logic. The primary access road down the mountain is already utterly impassable. The current radar sweep shows whiteout conditions hitting 0 visibility in 5 minutes. I didn't look up from the glowing blue screen of my tablet. I need 14 more minutes to completely secure the encrypted data packet from the damaged avionics bay before the lithium-ion battery completely drains due to the severe temperature drop. You don't have 14 minutes, Mr. Ruiz. The mountain doesn't care about your download speeds, she countered, stepping fully into the wreckage and bringing a swirling eddy of violent snow with her. I finally looked up, mildly irritated by the sudden, aggressive interruption to my established, highly optimized workflow. She was standing amidst the twisted, jagged metal of the cargo hold, wearing a heavy, high-visibility orange search and rescue parka. Her face was tightly framed by a thick, frost-covered hood. Her dark hair was plastered flat to her reddened cheeks with melting snow. Her dark eyes held the practical, unyielding urgency of someone who actually understood the biological metrics of severe hypothermia and frostbite. I'm Harper Edwards, lead ranger for this northern sector, and I am here to officially protect this crash site and my park's charter from municipal interference, she stated, her breath pluming in thick, heavy white clouds in the freezing air. The mayor's office just radioed on the analog emergency frequency. They are officially declaring this entire recovery zone a lost cause until the spring thaw. Mayor Vance wants to aggressively bury the evidence, totally discredit my jurisdictional authority, and seize the black box the second the storm breaks. He is formally pulling all municipal funding for the rescue team starting tomorrow morning at 0900, claiming severe safety violations on my part for keeping civilian teams out on the ridge this long. I tapped the reinforced screen of the tablet, rapidly initiating an emergency forced cache protocol, saving the encrypted packet directly to my local solid-state drive before the biting cold could permanently kill the processor. I am the federal liaison assigned to this wreckage, I stated, unplugging the heavy data cable from the aircraft's surviving port and securing the waterproof cap. If I don't secure this specific data packet, the NTSB audit fails, and Vance's legal liability disappears entirely. He knows perfectly well this plane belonged to his primary municipal freight contractor. If I officially prove mechanical failure due to skipped, legally mandated maintenance cycles, his entire city budget gets audited by the Federal Transport Board. He's weaponizing the weather system to bury the truth. He's weaponizing the weather system to bury us, Harper corrected sharply, refusing to let me intellectualize the immediate physical threat. She reached down without hesitation and grabbed the reinforced plastic handle of the bright orange flight data recorder case I had already meticulously detached from the main bulkhead. My primary winter ranger station is 1 mile down the southern ridge. It has a heavy cast iron wood stove, a backup diesel generator, and thick log walls. We are leaving this wreck. Now. I rapidly calculated the estimated walking speed of an adult human through 18 inches of fresh, uncompacted powder against the steadily dropping core temperature metrics. A human body loses heat 25 times faster in high wind. The collected data was utterly useless if the lead investigator was frozen solid to the deck of the plane. "Lead the way," I said. I powered the tablet down to actively conserve the remaining battery life, slid the heavy device securely into the waterproof, insulated chest pocket of my jacket, and grabbed my secondary tool bag, ensuring the heavy steel zippers were fully locked against the moisture. The hike down the southern ridge was an exercise in sheer, agonizing physical endurance. The ambient wind chill factored out to -25 degrees. The snow was blinding, a solid, moving wall of pure, stinging white that completely erased the horizon line, the tree canopy, and the sky. I pulled up the digital compass on my ruggedized smartwatch to track our exact downward trajectory, but the LCD screen flickered wildly, the pixels lagging heavily before dying completely as the extreme cold instantly killed the micro battery. I stopped in the knee-deep snow, tapping the dead, frozen glass of the watch face. My navigation telemetry just failed. We are operating entirely blind. The digital grid is gone. Harper stopped a few paces ahead. She didn't panic, and she didn't complain about the delay. She turned back, stepping close enough that I could clearly see the tiny crystals of ice forming on her dark eyelashes. She briefly, clinically checked my face for the telltale white patches of early frostbite, her eyes scanning my cheeks and nose with professional detachment, before pointing a thick, gloved finger at a massive Douglas fir tree towering to our left in the haze. "Look at the bark," she instructed, raising her voice significantly over the shrieking wind. "The moss only grows on the leeward side of the trunk up here at this specific altitude. The wind is currently hitting us from the north-northeast. That means the station is 200 yards at our 4 o'clock. I looked at the massive tree, analyzing her logic. It was purely analog data, utterly devoid of satellites, cellular towers, or processing power, but it was highly accurate, historically proven, and immediately verifiable in the field. I adjusted the heavy straps of my pack and followed her. She moved with a steady, relentless rhythm, reading the invisible landscape through deep, localized experience rather than digital telemetry. I kept my head down, focusing entirely on placing my heavy boots exactly into the deep, compressed tracks she was carving through the massive drifts ahead of me to radically conserve my own kinetic energy. When we finally reached the heavily reinforced wooden door of the remote ranger station and breached the small entryway, the sudden, absolute lack of wind was a profound physical shock to my system. The silence inside the cabin was absolute, heavy, and thick. Harper slammed the thick iron deadbolt home with a definitive, metallic clank, physically locking the violent storm out of our immediate reality. The main room of the cabin was highly utilitarian, completely devoid of unnecessary aesthetic design. It was dominated by a massive, black cast iron wood stove sitting solidly in the exact center of the floor on a raised stone hearth. Heavy, military-grade wool blankets were stacked neatly on a thick wooden frame bed in the far corner. The walls were lined with physical topographical maps and thick, heavy binders of analog park records. I immediately unzipped my heavy, snow-caked jacket, pulled my tablet back out with numb, clumsy fingers, and checked the internal battery life indicator. 40%. The brutal cold had drained 15% of my operational capacity in less than an hour of exposure. "Put the screen down," Harper said. She was methodically stripping off her frozen outer layers, hanging her dripping orange parka on a set of heavy iron hooks near the reinforced door. She was wearing a thick, dark green wool sweater underneath, her shoulders visibly tense from the lingering adrenaline of the hike. She walked directly over to the stove, grabbed a long wooden match from a sealed tin box, and struck it sharply against the rough stone, dropping the flare into the perfectly pre-laid kindling inside the iron belly. The digital world doesn't matter a single bit if your core temperature continues to drop into the danger zone, she said, watching the small fire catch and begin to consume the dry wood. We need to follow the established protocol for severe exposure. I looked at the glowing blue screen displaying the encrypted hexadecimal files, and then looked at her. Her hands were shaking slightly from the severe cold drop, but her movements were incredibly precise and purposeful. I swallowed. My hands stayed perfectly still on my knees, but my pulse thudded once hard against my throat. The human hardware needed rebooting before the software could be processed. I deliberately pressed the hard power button, plunging the device into total darkness, and set it face down on the heavy wooden table near the frosted window. Understood, I said quietly, stepping much closer to the radiating, analog heat of the iron stove. By the late afternoon of the second day of the total whiteout, the physical layout of the small cabin had naturally fallen into a highly predictable, efficient grid. We had mapped out clear, unspoken spatial boundaries to handle the forced proximity without causing unnecessary friction. I had claimed the large wooden table for my workspace, spreading out my printed municipal logs, the flight schematics, and my offline data parsing. She had claimed the communications desk in the corner, constantly monitoring the static-filled analog radio for any break in the severe weather patterns. Harper walked over to the wall, pulled down a large, heavily laminated topographical map, and spread it smoothly over the wooden table right next to my scattered, highly technical papers. She picked up a dull graphite pencil, marked a sharp, exact X over the specific ridge where the Cessna went down. As she reached the edge of the table, her hot ceramic mug slipped slightly on a loose piece of printer paper, sliding directly toward my active tablet. I caught it by the heavy handle before it could spill. I looked up. She was already raising an eyebrow, standing there silently, waiting for me to prioritize the space. I didn't wait for the verbal reprimand. I deliberately hit the power button on the tablet, plunging the screen into darkness, and set it face down. She slid the mug into the newly cleared space like a designated checkpoint. I didn't smile, my eyes did. Analog doesn't need a firmware update, she noted dryly, tapping the yellow pencil against the thick map, acknowledging the silent compliance. I looked at the dead smartwatch still strapped to my wrist, then at her precise hand-drawn coordinates. Efficiency takes many forms. I'll concede the data point. The blizzard continued to batter the thick log walls without a single pause. I was sitting at the table, aggressively reviewing a massive stack of maintenance logs I had proactively pulled from the unsecured municipal server hours before the crash occurred. The overhead lights above my head flickered once, dimmed to a dull, sickly yellow, and then died completely. The steady, rhythmic thrum of the heavy diesel generator, located in the attached exterior shed, sputtered, coughed violently, and fell entirely silent. I looked up from my paperwork into the sudden, absolute darkness. We just lost our primary power grid. Harper stood up instantly, clicking on a heavy-duty, tactical flashlight from the desk, the sharp beam cutting through the gloom. The diesel fuel line must be severely gelling in this extreme temperature drop. If we permanently lose the generator, we lose the radio, the interior lights, and the block heater for the water pipes. The cabin interior will drop below freezing in less than 4 hours. I have exactly 22% battery remaining on my tablet, I noted, checking the dead, black screen in the dark. I cannot process the final encrypted telemetry logs without external, stable power. Where is the generator? In the attached lean-to, Harper said, moving quickly toward the side door. But I'm not a heavy diesel mechanic. I just know how to turn the ignition key and check the basic oil levels. Engines don't care what they're bolted to. Air, fuel, spark. Same rules, I said, picking up my heavy tool bag and following her into the dark shed. We stepped into the freezing lean-to. The air was sharply, painfully cold, smelling heavily of raw diesel fuel and stale exhaust. Harper held the bright beam of the flashlight perfectly steady on the green metal housing of the generator. She didn't waver, and she didn't complain about the rapidly dropping temperature. She simply illuminated the necessary workspace. I unlatched the heavy side panel and pulled it away, exposing the block. I pulled my insulated gloves off to get accurate tactile feedback. The freezing metal of the engine block bit sharply into my bare skin. The fuel is actively moving, but the internal line pressure is completely wrong, I diagnosed, running my bare hand over the thick, braided fuel lines to feel the mechanical vibration pattern. The primary filter housing is freezing up, The engine is intentionally starving itself of fuel to prevent a total blowout of the cylinders. Do we have a clean spare filter? Harper asked, keeping the harsh light perfectly trained on the intake valve. No, I replied, pulling a heavy wrench from my bag. But we don't need the physical part. I worked quickly, my bare hands stinging fiercely from the cold. I drained the gelled line, manually warmed the filter housing with the heat from my palms, and ran a temporary clean bypass line directly from my spare kit just enough to keep the generator alive until morning. I carefully bled the excess air from the line with a small pressure valve, watching the fuel level equalize in the dim light. Hit the rubber primer switch 3 times, then turn the ignition, I ordered, stepping back from the block. Harper reached forward, her thumb pressing the heavy rubber primer button 3 times with perfect rhythm before she turned the metal key. The engine turned over heavily, resisting the cold, coughed a thick, acrid cloud of black smoke, and then caught, roaring back to life. The overhead bulb in the lean-to flickered and burned bright, flooding the space with light. I kept the RPM low, and I'll run it in short cycles, heat first, radio second, so we don't cook the block or risk a leak, I explained, wiping a thick streak of diesel off my freezing hands with a blue shop rag. The power grid is stable. We walked back into the main cabin. The analog heat radiating from the massive wood stove felt intensely, overwhelmingly welcoming after the freezing temperatures of the shed. The timeline architecture in Mayor Vance's maintenance logs is completely corrupted, I said quietly, picking up exactly where I had left off before the power failure, tapping a specifically highlighted line item on the printed paper with my pen. Harper looked at me, shaking her head slightly at my immediate, highly efficient pivot back to the raw data. She walked over to the small kitchenette area. I heard the clatter of heavy ceramic. She walked back and set a thick ceramic mug down on the extreme edge of my workspace, same spot, same rule. Beside it, she placed exactly half of a foil-wrapped oat survival ration bar. Black tea, no sugar. The exact same as yesterday, she said, pulling a heavy wooden chair out and sitting directly across from me, and half a ration bar. I'm strictly pacing out the caloric supplies. I stopped analyzing the complex spreadsheet. I picked up the mug. The intense heat radiating from the thick ceramic was a highly efficient microcomfort against my cold palms. I took a slow sip. Then, I looked at the dry, crumbly square of the ration bar sitting on the foil. I broke it carefully down the exact middle, pushing one small piece back across the table toward her. She didn't argue the logic. She just took it. Thank you, I said. For the fuel, what exactly is corrupted in the timeline? She asked, leaning forward slightly, her attention shifting entirely to the papers. Mayor Vance's Central Municipal Office officially approved a comprehensive, high-level overhaul of the Cessna's entire manifold and exhaust system. Exactly 3 weeks ago, I explained, turning the dense paper around so she could read the highlighted columns. But the engraved serial numbers on the heavy engine parts I physically pulled from the wreckage yesterday perfectly matched the original factory installation records from 8 years ago. The municipal contractor billed the city for $250,000 in critical structural upgrades that were simply never performed. Vance signed off on the final safety inspection personally, completely bypassing the standard regulatory checks. Harper's dark eyes narrowed, processing the variables instantly. She reached into the deep pocket of her fleece sweater and pulled out a sharply folded, digitally stamped receipt. I filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the state attorney general's secure portal before the storm hit. I just got the automated ping on the encrypted radio channel verifying receipt. If Vance comes here, it won't be just my word against his. Before I could process the confirmation of her proactive systemic defense, the analog radio on the communications desk crackled loudly, a harsh burst breaking the white noise of the static. Dispatch to Ranger Edwards. Do you copy? The heavily filtered voice of the municipal dispatcher echoed in the quiet room. Harper stood up instantly, walking over and grabbing the heavy plastic microphone. Edwards copying. Go ahead. Dispatch. Ranger Edwards. Be advised. Mayor Vance has officially authorized a private, heavy-duty plowing contractor to aggressively breach the Southern Ridge access road. They are utilizing heavy machinery and completely ignoring the standard severe storm protocols. They estimate reaching your station and the primary crash site by 0700 tomorrow morning to secure the wreckage. You are officially ordered to stand down, surrender your badge, and remain in your cabin. Harper released the transmit button, the line dropping back to a dead hiss. She didn't hesitate. She looked at the yellow paper containing the official stand-down order, then walked deliberately over to the cast-iron stove, opened the heavy metal door, and fed the municipal notice directly into the roaring flames. She watched the paper curl and turn to white ash. She turned to face me, her expression entirely grim but unbroken. They aren't waiting for the storm to clear naturally. They're coming to physically bury the evidence before the state police get here. He's formally ordering you to surrender all gathered debris to his municipal deputies the absolute second the access roads clear, or he will immediately terminate your employment and dissolve the park's charter, I noted, watching the final embers of the paper fade. He wasn't trying to win an administrative argument. He was trying to violently delete the chain of custody before it officially existed, she said, her voice hard. It's an aggressive override protocol, I analyzed. So what exactly do we do? We have less than 12 hours before his contractors arrive with heavy equipment, she said, looking directly at me for a logical path forward. I am choosing to protect this evidence over keeping my job. You have to choose right now between keeping your data safely hidden or risking everything to upload it to the feds. We compile an unassailable data packet, I said, reaching out and flipping my tablet back over, hitting the power button with absolute certainty. We build a legal and technical case so structurally sound that his highly paid legal team can't find a single syntax error to exploit. I need to upload the entire cached packet to the secure federal server via the satellite uplink before his private contractors breach that door. The tablet booted up, but the battery indicator flashed a stark, red warning. 18%. The extreme cold was degrading the chemical efficiency of the battery much faster than the bypass generator could push a charge through the portable adapter. The battery is failing, I noted flatly. If I run the heavy decryption software to compile the final NTSB report, the processor will drain the remaining charge in less than 2 hours. I simply don't have the processing power to jump between the scanned municipal spreadsheets and the flight logs on the screen simultaneously. Harper pulled her chair around the table, sitting directly beside me. She reached out and pulled the massive stack of printed municipal budget logs toward her. I'll run the analog data, she said firmly. You keep your screen entirely focused on the flight telemetry and the upload code. Tell me exactly what dates and serial numbers you need, and I'll find the matching fraudulent invoices on the hard copies. We process it together. For the next 2 hours, we worked in incredible, synchronized precision. The ambient temperature in the cabin fluctuated as the wind hammered the log walls. At 1:15 a.m., the overhead lights flickered violently. The diesel generator outside coughed, the RPMs dropping dangerously low as ice threatened the bypassed intake valve. I froze, my finger hovering statically over the digital keyboard. Harper stood up instantly, grabbing her heavy coat. I'll clear the intake vent, she said, slipping out the side door into the freezing lean-to. 2 agonizing minutes later, the engine roared back to a steady, reliable hum. She returned, covered in a fresh dusting of snow, but the electrical grid held firm. I need the specific billing invoice for the manifold pressure valve. Date range, October 12th to October 15th. I ordered quietly, my eyes never leaving the screen. Harper's finger flew rapidly down the columns of printed paper. Got it. Invoice 4,409. Billed by Apex Aviation Services on October 14th. Total cost, $12,000. Authorized by signature code MV01. MV01. I typed the code directly into the formal incident report on my screen, locking the variable into place. Mayor Vance. The analog radio crackled again. A short, sharp burst of static. Contractor unit actual. Passing mile marker 4. Heavy drifts, but the plow is holding. Harper glanced at the radio, then immediately back to the paper logs. They're moving much faster than expected. We only have about 40 minutes. Focus entirely on the invoice dates, I said, my fingers flying across the glass. We are building a firewall out of paper and code. At 2 in the morning, I hit the final execution command. The tablet whirred softly as it heavily compressed the files into a single, encrypted packet. I initiated the satellite uplink. The progress bar crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. 10%? 20%. Suddenly, a deep, rhythmic vibration shook the floorboards beneath my boots. A sweep of harsh, yellow halogen headlights cut through the blinding snow outside, throwing long, distorted shadows against the frosted cabin window. The plow was already on the lower ridge. The physical threat was literally knocking at the door while the progress bar hovered at 90%. The low-frequency howling of the wind outside finally began to significantly die down. slowly replaced by the soft, heavy silence of deep snow and the idling rumble of heavy machinery in the distance. The storm was breaking, and our time was up. I was staring intently at the progress bar, my eyes burning fiercely from the harsh blue glare of the tablet screen. My back was stiff. I reached out blindly across the wooden table, my hand searching for my empty ceramic mug, needing the physical, tactile sensation of the object to ground myself in reality. Harper smoothly intercepted my hand before I knocked the cup over. Step away from the screen. You've been staring at that blue light for hours. Drink this. Then breathe. She placed a fresh, hot cup of tea perfectly into the center of my palm. Upload complete. The tablet chimed softly, displaying a bright green confirmation checkmark. I looked down at the steaming mug, then slowly up at her face, illuminated by the warm, orange glow of the wood stove. The overwhelming urge to explain the data structure, to quantify the success of the upload, suddenly faded entirely. I pressed the hard power button on the side of the tablet, instantly killing the harsh blue light and plunging the wooden table back into the warm, analog light of the fire. I placed the expensive device face down on the wood. I turned my chair slightly, keeping my hands resting loosely on my knees, and gave her my full, undivided attention. The primary data is securely cached and successfully uploaded to the federal server, I said quietly. She didn't reach for me, she just stayed. Same chair, same heat, same steady breathing. The next morning, the storm had completely broken. The sky outside the frosted windows was a brilliant, painful, blinding blue. The treaded state police snowcat, accompanied by a heavy municipal plow truck, breached the main access road and rumbled loudly into the clearing in front of the cabin at 0700 hours. The heavy diesel engines idled aggressively. The captain of the state troopers stepped out of the heated cab. He was flanked immediately by Mayor Vance, who was wearing a heavy designer winter coat and a highly confident smile. Vance had brought his own municipal deputies, hovering near the plow truck, clearly expecting to confiscate the evidence by force. Harper and I stepped out onto the wooden front porch of the cabin to meet them. The air was so cold it burned my lungs with every breath, but my mind was completely clear, calculating the final variables. Ranger Edwards, Vance said smoothly, projecting unchecked authority across the snowy yard. I am formally relieving you of your municipal duties effective immediately. Hand over all flight materials, any printed logs, and the black box immediately to my deputies. I stepped forward, moving smoothly to put my body physically between Vance and Harper. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented the undeniable weight of the data. Mayor Vance, I said, my tone entirely flat. I am the lead aviation investigator assigned by the Federal Transport Board. I have already initiated and successfully completed a secure data transfer of the entire flight telemetry directly to the state police primary server via satellite uplink 5 hours ago. Vance's confident smile faltered slightly. He glanced nervously at the trooper captain, who remained entirely stoic. I turned my attention to the trooper captain and handed him a sealed manila envelope. Captain, this physical packet contains the localized data summary and the hard drive backup. It explicitly details a $250,000 fraudulent billing scheme for commercial aircraft maintenance that was never actually performed. This technical data is flawlessly cross-referenced with specific municipal wire transfers authorized directly and solely by the mayor's office. Vance's smug expression vanished completely, replaced by a tight, furious panic. He stepped aggressively toward Harper, trying to bypass my physical block. You have absolutely no authority here. You're fired. Give me the primary hard drives right now. Harper didn't flinch. She stood her ground perfectly, her posture relaxed. She reached into the deep pocket of her heavy parka, pulled out the folded, digitally stamped document she had shown me earlier, and handed it directly to the captain. Captain, this is a formal, documented whistleblower complaint against the mayor's office, Harper stated, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. It was filed directly with the state attorney general's secure portal prior to the storm hitting. It explicitly outlines his ongoing attempts to officially coerce local park rangers into ignoring severe safety violations. Harper turned her gaze directly to Vance, her chin lifted high. And for the official record, Investigator Ruiz is formally listed as my primary technical partner on the chain of custody documentation. His uploaded data absolutely corroborates my report. You can't fire him, and you absolutely cannot touch the wreckage without going through both of us simultaneously. Not optional. The captain slowly reviewed the paperwork, his expression hardening into stone. He carefully folded the documents and placed them securely into his inner uniform pocket. "Mayor, you'll need to accompany me back to the precinct immediately," the captain said, his voice dropping into an official register that left absolutely no room for political maneuvering. "We have a significant amount of secure data to review regarding your municipal contracts and your direct interference in a federal crash site." Vance glared at me, the bullying energy completely evaporating as he realized his entire corrupt system had been systematically dismantled. He had absolutely no leverage left. He turned sharply and walked silently toward the idling snowcat. The captain nodded respectfully to us. "The federal board will contact you both for the official depositions next week." Outstanding analytical work, investigator. Good job holding the line, Ranger. When the snowcat and the plow truck finally turned around and disappeared down the snowy access road, the profound silence of the mountain returned, clean and uncontaminated. Harper let out a long, slow breath. Her shoulders dropped 2 full inches. She turned to me, the biting cold mountain air flushing her cheeks a deep red. "You compiled a mathematically perfect data packet," she said, looking at the empty driveway. "We built a highly functional firewall," I corrected mildly, ensuring the credit was distributed accurately. I looked at her, standing there in the bright snow. The perfect, sterile isolation I had carefully cultivated in my acoustic labs and secure server rooms for years suddenly felt incredibly inefficient and deeply hollow. "The initial legal depositions will likely require multiple trips back down to the city over the next few months," I noted. "I have a lot of accumulated vacation days saved up," Harper replied seamlessly, her dark eyes tracking my movement as I slowly pulled my insulated gloves off. "We'd ride down with the troopers at first light," I offered, keeping my hands resting loosely at my sides, deliberately managing the distance between us. Not out of hesitation, but out of respect for her boundaries. One deposition at a time. We'd debrief at the diner by the precinct, same table, same rule, screens stay off. "Just as long as you promise to leave the tablet completely powered down while we eat," she smiled, stepping slightly closer, her boots crunching softly in the snow. "Agreed," I said, the single word feeling entirely right. We walked back inside the sturdy log cabin. The heavy cast-iron stove continued to radiate a warm, steady heat. I looked at the ceramic mug resting on the edge of the wooden table, exactly right next to the powered-down tablet. It was a perfect, analog comfort against the cold. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Stability isn't said. It's built. Green flag. He powered down his screen when she asked, proving her presence mattered more than the data. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.